Hi guys, it's Audra with Gertens, and today I'm going to talk about starting your seeds indoors. This is the time of year when you want to start most of your seeds here in Zone 4. So we're going to go over everything from which seeds to plant now and which seeds to plant outside, all the way through to transplanting your ingrown seedlings out in the garden. The first thing you need to consider is which seeds you want to start and when. When you look at a seed packet, on the back there's generally really good information about days to maturity, the temperature that is ideal for germination, and so forth. So the easiest thing to do in my mind is to work backwards in time. When do you think that you'll be able to transplant these seedlings outside, and how big do you want them to be at that point, and then work backwards. In general, I would say you want to start your seeds indoors about 8 weeks before you transplant them outside. That gives you 1 week for germination, roughly, 6 weeks for the seedlings to grow on, and then another week for you to start hardening the plant off before you put it outside. But it is going to vary for all of your different plants, so just look at your calendar and figure out what works for you in your garden and the particular seeds that you're planting. I usually start things indoors that are like tender annuals. Right here for some examples that I'm going to start today, I have some Cosmos, Cleome, Zinnias. Those are all nice to have about 8 weeks of growth on them before you put them in the ground, because you'll get blooms a lot faster. Here I'm going to be starting some tomatoes and some peppers. That's what I'm going to work on today. But there are a lot of other things that are nice to start indoors: herbs, eggplants, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, things like that. The things that you'd want to start outside in the garden by direct sowing them, there's a few categories. One is crops that can take cooler weather, so you can actually plant them outside earlier than all these things that will need to be transplanted outside, generally in May for us, when the temperatures are much warmer in the soil. So cold crops like kale, broccoli, lots of the different brassicas can go outside very early. Those you can transplant, not quite yet, but you can do it fairly soon in the ground. Another set of plants I would not start indoors would be vining plants. So although some people do it with sweet peas and things like that, I wouldn't plant pole beans or peas or squash, things that are going to vine everywhere, because it's very hard to trellis anything and to keep your plants from getting tangled up in each other when they're in a seed starting tray. They don't have that much room, they're going to get unruly, and then when you pull them apart you're going to break the leader vine. So those are a few things to think about when you're choosing which seeds to start inside. Once you have started your collection of seeds, you're going to need to figure out how many cells you need for each, and think about your space, because doing seeding does take up a lot of space. How much space do you have in terms of your grow light area or your sunny south facing window area? Don't overextend yourself, because if you do not have enough light, the seedlings won't do well. Today I'm going to start with this. It's just a standard Jiffy seed starting kit here, 72 cells. It has the drip tray here, which collects all the water at the bottom so that you don't ruin any of your surfaces. Then it has your cell packs here. You can divide these apart. I'm going to plant different seeds in the different cells to keep them straight. And then it also comes with a humidity dome, which I will talk about in a minute. The first thing you need to do is start with the proper seeding mix. You do not want to use potting soil, you do not want to use garden soil, they're too heavy. You want something that is sterile so that you don't have any seedling disease. So it's very important to start with a mix that is designed particularly for germination. It'll be double sifted, so very lightweight, lofty, and there'll be a lot of air for those baby roots. You don't want them to be drowning in a heavy soil. So I'm going to start here by pouring this mix in here, because what I like to do is to pre-moisten my seeding soil. If you get the really large size bags of seeding soil that are professional mixes, which we do also sell here, those will have a wetting agent in them that helps the peat to start absorbing water so it doesn't run off. But when you first wet peat moss, which is the basis of a seeding mix, it tends to run off. You have to let it absorb a little bit. And I just add the water a little bit at a time and then work it with my hands to determine if I need more water. You do not want your soil to be soggy, but you want it to hold together in clumps when you pick it up. You want it to be kind of like a sponge-like texture so that it already has some of the water worked in there and the water won't just run off. But I like the tactile sensation of gardening and planting, so I rarely use gloves, even though I should. I only do that if I'm dealing with something really thorny or scratchy. And I'm making a mess, but that's part of the fun of gardening, isn't it? And I love the smell of fresh soil when I'm planting. That's one of the things that screams spring to me, is that smell of damp soil. All right, so this is looking pretty good. When I hold it, I can kind of form it into clumps here. It's not just falling through my hands. So I'm just gonna start packing my cells here. I'm gonna fill them up most of the way to the top. I'm gonna leave a little bit of space. I'm just tamping it down lightly with my fingers. And you can always adjust if you need a little bit more soil as you go and you plant, that's totally fine. You can just scrape some out if there's too much. This isn't an exact science. You don't have to worry about being perfect. You're dealing with plants, seeds that cost, $1.79 for 100. You can afford to have some fun, especially if you're doing this with kids. Don't make it too serious. Don't make it too complicated. The ideal is to plant your seed 2 to 3 times the depth of what the width of the seed is. So if you're planting a large seed, like peas, those are large and round. You're gonna wanna plant those 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. But if you have something like a zinnia, I'll start with those here. I have a Scarlet Flame. I like starting the State Fair type zinnias from seed because you cannot buy those at a garden center. It's another reason to start from seed is you can get so many varieties and flavors of vegetables, so many types of large flowers that you just cannot get at a greenhouse because they require so much staking once they're big and tall. So the State Fair zinnias are really tall. I love them in my garden, great for pollinators. These seeds are extremely thin. They're pretty much like tissue paper. So unlike a pea, which you would plant much deeper, these I generally just put on the very surface of the soil. You do not need to plant them deep. So I'm just gonna I'm not gonna be precise about this. I'm gonna put a couple seeds in each cell. These are fresh seeds, so they have high germination rate, so theoretically you should be able to just do 1 per cell. But I always like to do 2 or 3. That way, later on, once they have come up and I'm about to thin, I can say, oh, this one looks stronger than the other 2 in the cell, and then I just thin out the 2 weaker and I pick the stronger, more robust seedling to keep. So that's why I'm gonna do that. So I spread those on the surface. Labeling is very important. I just tend to use these plastic labels and write on them with a Sharpie. So I'm gonna put this in here. This is the Scarlet Flame, just so that I remember what I'm doing here. Sometimes I get too excited about seeding and I have to stop and say, oh, Audra, make sure that you're labeling everything and keeping good records. This is the Cleome, and again, these seeds are absolutely tiny, so tiny. Because I'm not too much of a perfectionist here, I'm just gonna scatter some seeds in the center of each cell here. They're very tiny, but I'm just gonna try to get them towards the center of the cell. And then the rest I'm just going to put back in my seed packet. You can keep seeds from year to year. What I like to do is to make sure that I fold the top over so that none of the seeds fall out. I usually just tape it shut. And then you want to keep them in a cool, dry location so that they don't germinate, they don't mold, things like that. Germination rates do go down with every passing year, and some seeds, certain lettuces, you don't want to keep from year to year, but many seeds, I found particularly with flower seeds, you can keep. And in the 2nd or 3rd year, you may just want to put more seeds per cell in your seeding tray. In case some of them don't germinate, you still have enough to plant outside. So this is the Queen Cleome, so I'm gonna label that one here. Next, I'm gonna start Sonata Cosmos. These are a great one to have in your garden. They're so beautiful, so light and airy and dainty. Watch out for the rabbits because they will go after them. These are fairly easy to see because they have a lighter color versus some seeds which pretty much disappear once you have them in your tray. So I'll label those. And then next I'm gonna start a couple vegetables. These are very easy peppers and tomatoes to start indoors, as well as herbs. These can be more difficult later on in the growing season. Some people deal with slug issues with peppers, they deal with blight with tomatoes, but in terms of starting the seeds, very, very easy. And because they like warmer weather, you definitely wanna have them at a decent size when you plant them out in May. If you plant them out in the ground by direct sowing in May, you're really not gonna have a long enough season here in Minnesota. So I'm gonna start with the hillbilly tomato. These are from Sandia Seed, which specializes in hot peppers and tomatoes. So they have a lot of varieties that you wouldn't normally have. And these are such tiny seeds. They come in their own special little packet here because they don't want you to lose those seeds. So I'm gonna put those back here. Label those. And then my last one I'm gonna plant is a very hot pepper, also from Sandia, which is the Dragon's Breath. Now this I would be starting for my father because I cannot handle hot peppers. I'm more of a bell pepper kind of gal, but I know there are all those aficionados out there who love their hot peppers, and boy do we have a big selection of hot peppers, specialty hot peppers, including ghost peppers. So if you can handle it, we got it for you. All right, so now I have all my seeds here. I'm just going to add a little bit of water to them. I don't want to use too large of a watering can because the flow will be too much and it will just splash the soil everywhere and it will dislodge your seeds. So you can miss them if you want. That's another option. I'll show you both ways. So if I'm using this little one, I just do it very slowly. And then if you see that the seeds kind of move to the edge, I just try to move them more towards the center. The other thing you can do, like I mentioned, is misting. And that is easier if you have tiny seeds, which is basically everything that I'm planting today. So for that, just want to mist the soil, and that is much nicer if you're worried about dislodging your seeds and moving them around too much, possibly losing track of them. It does take longer and your hand might get a little tired, but it's always nice to have a mister to settle your seeds in a little bit. Now that I have them watered, what I do with seeds that are small and thin, like all of the ones I planted today, is I cover them with vermiculite. Vermiculite is a volcanic rock and it's mica based, and it's great for things like storing bulbs and covering your seeds because it helps retain moisture. So with these little seeds, you can imagine how quickly they might dry out because they're so close to the surface, because you can't plant them deeply in the soil or they won't come up, and the air will just dry them out so quickly. So I like to use vermiculite on top because it covers the seeds up so that they'll germinate. Most seeds need darkness to germinate. Some seeds actually need light. But I find that if I use vermiculite, I don't have to worry about it either way. I don't even separate my seeds that need darkness for germination or light for germination. I've never had a problem, they all come up. So vermiculite is my go-to here. I just scatter a very thin layer on the surface. You don't want it thick, you just want a thin layer. If you have seeds, like I mentioned, pea seeds, which you have to plant very deep, I cover those with soil. I do not use vermiculite for large seeds because I can plant them deep enough in the soil that they can have a nice cover by just using the same seeding soil on the top. So now we have planted and we're ready to get our seeds set up in the seed starting station.